Good evening. My name is Patrick Reed. Tonight, I will be continuing the series on fruits of the Spirit. Tonight's topic will be on faithfulness. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to thank Pastor Tony and Pastor Glenn for this opportunity to speak with you this evening. Speaking is not something that comes natural to me, but it's something that I've been working on, and I'm grateful to have this moment with you. And I hope that we can have this service tonight. We can grow together and find something useful in our growth in Christianity, and most importantly, our connection with God as we discuss His faithfulness to us. As we know, the Bible is full of truth. And time again, it shows that God is who He said He is. I am the way, the truth, and the life. However, as a young Christian, I often became frustrated with that. I always had many questions every time I went to service. It wasn't because I didn't want to believe in God. It was because I had some holes with myself that I didn't want to explore. I often asked God a lot of questions about things I already knew the answers to, but I still had questions. If you haven't noticed, I share a lot of things in common with doubting Thomas. Thomas always asked God's questions time and time again. Even though he's seen God do miracle after miracle, he still had his questions. And that was something that I struggled with for a long time, questioning God's faithfulness, because I could not see it in the face of my fellow man or in the interactions that I had from day to day. It wasn't because God wasn't showing up, and it wasn't because He wasn't faithful. It was because I was choosing not to listen. I was choosing to be disobedient, and I was choosing to ignore what God laid out before me because I wanted to do it my own way. If you haven't noticed by now, I share a lot of things with doubting Thomas, one of the apostles for Jesus Christ. That's something that's hard for me to say out loud because I want to believe in God. I want to give Him my entire heart. But in my quiet moments, I often find myself questioning God, and God has been very faithful to me. God has been very giving to me. God has been very redeeming to me. I'm grateful for the family He's given me. I'm grateful for the church He's given to me. I'm grateful for the community He's placed me in. I'm grateful for the opportunity of service that He laid out before me. Tonight, I'm going to give you 3 examples of God's faithfulness to me in an effort to, it releases you from things that you might be struggling with. Originally, I wanted to look up some examples in the Bible and tell some stories about just in general, like what you would normally get in church, but that wasn't ringing true for me this evening. And I delayed recording this because I was fighting with God about that for some period of time, because I wanted to be open and honest with you, but I did not know how to do that through someone else's story. And so tonight, I'm going to share a couple of points in my life where God was faithful to me. And the real topic of tonight's conversation is God's faithfulness with the unfaithful. And tonight, I'm talking about that unfaithful person. It's myself, but hopefully, or maybe not hopefully, you see yourself in some of those unfaithful moments. And we can explore how God is faithful to us, even when we're completely undeserving and unworthy of His love and His compassion. Before we begin, I would like to say a quick prayer to cover my words this evening, to guide us through this time together. Thank you, God, for this opportunity to speak with my fellow Christians, my fellow church members at Hope and Life Fellowship Church. I ask that you guide my words and guide my heart. I ask that tonight's message land on the intended targets that you wanted to receive this message. And I hope that I decrease myself and increase you while I'm going through this process. As you heard in previous weeks, in Galatians 5:22-23, the Holy Spirit produces fruit in our lives: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, and faithfulness. Tonight, we're going to go through 3 topics that in my life that have shown God's faithfulness to me and helped me become a better man and a better Christian. My journey began in a church in Snellville, Georgia in early 2007. I had recently met my future wife. I met some really nice people in the church, and it opened me up to a different world than what I was used to. This was a time in my life where I wasn't necessarily living as I should. I had just became in relationship with God, but I was not strong in my faith. I was Christian curious is the best way I can describe that. Where I had an encounter with God when I was in college, but also I hadn't fully had that full change. Well, on a lot of levels I did, but I felt like God was calling me to do some things that I wasn't ready to do, that I didn't want to do. But God stayed true to me, and he's been working with me for a lot of years regarding that. And that every time it seems like I get comfortable, God calls me to a new level. And so when I entered that church in 2007, I was actually feeling pretty good about myself and where I was going. I had just recently met my future wife. I was looking for a full-time career opportunity, which eventually led me into law enforcement. Which was a good thing for me, but it was also a challenging thing for me. In my darkest corners, I like to help people, and often when I dream, I like to put myself in that space you will see as a hero. Like I want to save people, I want to be there for people, which is something the devil has often used in my life to set up different traps for me. And it's been plenty of times when I walked into those traps and God had to come save me and rescue me because I was operating up under my own strength and I did not see the trap the devil laid for me. So after I had started in the police department, I had been there for a couple of years, almost 4 years. Me and my wife had our first son, Still, which many of you were a part of, and you know how that journey began, which I won't go into this evening. But we had just had Still, and I was out for a couple of months, and I had recently returned to work. And this is my first week back, and I was at a Quick Trip gas station on Singleton Road near Indian Trail. And I remember that night because it was such an impact on me that it changed me from a broken place to a healed place to where it led me to this moment that we're having this evening. I received an emergency dispatch alert of an aggravated domestic with a person shot. And in my mind, it was like, oh, this is my moment. This is what I was put here to do. This is what I do. This is what you called me to do. I'm finna go do what I was made for. Because in my mind, I was finna show up and I was going to put a stop to a bad thing, and I was going to do it my way and be completely successful in that. And I was going to deal with some adult doing something that was really bad that needed to be stopped. So I ran to my police car. I was right down the street. It was a couple streets over. And I remember when I pulled up on scenes, it was people running all over the place. And what I saw was a little arm. That little arm was on the hood of a car. And a mother was screaming. And a father was screaming at me to save his son's life. And I immediately ran over and I started doing everything I was trained to do. And I went through the CPR process. And I remember his little arm just flailing back and forth. And I remember he had this hole in his chest. And it seems like I did CPR forever. And it just felt forever. And I remember when the paramedics arrived, they eventually grabbed the little boy and they took off with him with the lights and sirens. And, me and my partner, we were high-fiving each other. I was like, yeah, we did a good job, great job. And I'm really excited. And that's exactly where the devil wanted me to be, because I was operating on my own strength. And I remember I asked the paramedic that stayed behind them to deal with a second victim that wasn't as hurt as bad as the child. I said, hey, when you get a moment, can you give me an update on the little boy? And he looked me in the face and he said he's gone. that absolutely broke me. And it put me in a position to where I had to deal with the fact that I failed because I was operating under my own strength. It was entirely about what I wanted to do, how I wanted to show up. And the devil put me in a position to where he had me exactly where he wanted me to be. Because I was upset with God for not getting me there sooner. I was upset with God for not guiding my hands quicker. I was upset with God with the events of the night, how they unfolded. I was upset with God, period. I went home that night. I cried multiple nights. There was a lot of anger and frustration. I didn't want to go to church the next Sunday and the week after that, but I still went. But there was a lot of anger there. And the devil had accomplished exactly what he wanted, what he would do in a lot of our lives. He will set different traps for us where we will blame God for our own doings. Because the fact of the matter is, I didn't check with God that night. I wasn't faithful to God. God was right there with me the whole time. I stopped listening. I stopped operating up under his faith and up under his strength. I wanted to do it on my own. And so therefore, when I was blaming God for not showing up for me, that was not the case. The fact of the matter, I left and disengaged myself from God in that interaction. But luckily, God had already put me in an environment where I had a strong church. I had a strong pastor that was guiding me. I had a strong community that was pouring into me. And those people, they wouldn't let go of me. They prayed for me. They held on to me, and they reminded me that God is faithful. God is love. God is joy. God does not do things to hurt you. If you feel associated with God, it's not because he abandoned you. It's more so you probably abandoned God and you stopped paying attention to what God had for you. And so in that space, because I was in community in church and God was faithful, ever present in my life, even though I didn't want to pay attention, it allowed me to take that anger and that frustration and peel it back to grow into something different. I had an idea of who I was, and I had an idea of who I was supposed to be. But God knew who I was, and God knew what I was put on this earth to do. And the devil did not want those things to be accomplished. And so that was a trick. That's something the devil does with me often, to where it makes me feel unworthy, unwanted, unappreciated, and unloved by God, because he's constantly trying to poke holes. And I think that's why I ask a lot of questions. And I think that's why a lot of Christians ask questions, because we're a little bit scared to let go and let God lead the way. It's a very uncomfortable space to be in. But time and time again, God has shown up. He has been faithful to us. He has comforted us in trials and tribulations. He's even been present when we've chosen not to listen. And so from what the devil meant to destroy me, God used it to elevate and grow my relationship with him, because it showed me God's grace, God's faithfulness, God's community, through my wife, through my church family, through my community. And that grew me. And I think even after that time period, it was still times where I would question God. I still, like, to this very night, I question God about a lot of things. I have plenty of questions. He gives me plenty of answers. And then I will come up with more questions. But a lot of that is just me growing as a Christian and getting comfortable with the spaces that God is calling me into. It doesn't mean for me, and it doesn't mean for you, if you have questions, that something's wrong with you, to be invested in your relationship with God, because it's a give and take. And so we got to make sure we explore that, and then we live that truth at all times. The second example I'm going to share this evening was after I had transitioned from working on the street. I had transitioned to the school police, and this was something that this church has helped me with a couple of years ago, several years ago at this particular point. But it was the first time in my life where I saw God dealing with me while also dealing with other Christians and other people of this world, and seeing him engage and make a plan that I didn't understand, where it was something before I even knew to ask the question. God had already laid the plan and laid out how made the road smooth for me. I was a mentor and a police officer at the time inside the school police, inside my school. A young man that I was mentoring walked into my office. I just happened to notice he was wearing some clothes that another student was wearing the day before. From that conversation, I ended up identifying a couple hundred kids in the school system that were either homeless or disadvantaged, by working with the school counselors. And that day, for whatever reason, God prompted me to drive to a local church near the school. I went to that church, knocked on the door, completely unannounced, unplanned. There was only one other car in the driveway. I knocked on the door. The pastor's wife opened the door. She introduced herself. She let me know she normally would have been gone by now, but she couldn't find her keys. And I said, hey, this is so random, but I feel like God told me to come over here and ask you for some help. And I say, hey, I got a lot of kids that need food and I don't have any money. And she said, that's funny. I just got a check a couple of days ago, a big check. And the stipulation was that I was to provide for homeless and disadvantaged kids. And I didn't know any homeless and disadvantaged kids. And here I was showing up with a whole bunch of kids and no money. And so that was an example of acting on something God wanted me to do in his faithfulness. He sent me somewhere that I was not familiar with, that led to someone else who had already activated their faithfulness and wrote that church a check for some money to be able to take care of kids that they didn't even know about, which led me to go to another church. And that process repeated itself. Even in my own church at Hope and Life, where I called our pastors and I was like, hey, this is what's going on. And the response I got was what was the need? Because God was already operating in so many different spaces that I was completely unaware about. But God was already moving. He was already laying out his foundation to what he wanted to take place in his kingdom. And from that, we created an opportunity, or we created a space where for several years we fed homeless and disadvantaged kids and families. And for Thanksgiving, we provided toys for Christmas. But that was solely based off acting on a nudge from God, being faithful to God to follow his plan, where it was something where I was completely confused about. I'm pretty sure she was also confused about, like, hey, why did somebody just write me this random check? But God already had that in place. Like, hey, this is something that we're going to accomplish in my kingdom for my glory, to where you don't have to understand all the moving parts or the pieces, but if you're faithful to God, it'll work out in your favor and guide you through your journey in life. The next thing I'm going to share with you this evening is the journey that a lot of y'all are witnessing in real time. On June 14, 2004, I was speaking at my father's funeral, which was also the first time I had spoke publicly. At that service, I told God that I would do whatever he asked me to do. I would be obedient to something I knew that was there many years ago, but I didn't want to follow that plan. But I told God that I will be faithful to his journey and whatever he deems he wants me to do. And from that, you've seen me speak on a couple occasions at church with my wife. This is actually the first time, even though it's via video, that I've spoken on my own. And this was something that was uncomfortable, but I think it's something God was like, hey, you're going to do this for me to empower my kingdom, to where I needed to remove myself because I saw myself in a certain way, or I had a certain idea about myself, but God had a different plan for me. God laid down a different road, like he lays down a different road for all of us. I think the interactions that we have with God in our quiet spaces and the interactions that we have with God in our loud places allow us to be impactful to each other, to motivate each other, and most importantly, to glorify God. God has shown up in every phase of my life. God has shown up in every phase of your life. But there are some seasons where we choose not to pay attention. We choose not to be obedient. But God's grace is sufficient. God is always there for you. He is only waiting for you to invite him into your space. So it's okay for you to ask questions. It's okay for you to doubt yourself. But I would tell you, never doubt God. Test him, try him, and watch how he delivers for you. You might not always like the answer, because sometimes no is the answer, because it's something protecting you from something you can't see coming around the corner if you make that decision. Trust God's plan. Trust him in your day-to-day life. Trust him in your marriage. Trust him in your parenting. Trust him at work. Trust him in your journey. God will always show up for you. God will be faithful to you. God will deliver whatever you need him to deliver. I hope you enjoyed this message this evening. I hope it blesses you and your family. And most importantly, I hope it blesses the Spirit of God. I say thank you for your time this evening, and I hope to see you soon. Have a wonderful evening.